So welcome everybody to the Complete Guide to Self-Determination program. We are going to talk all about probably not everybody's favorite topic today, which is the budget. And I will say out of the whole process, this is probably my least favorite, but it's really an important piece. And I want to make sure that everybody knows how to get the information that they need and understand what's going on. Now, do not think that you as a participant have to come up with this budget because it will scare you if you think that you do not. We're showing you samples of everything so you have an idea of what to expect, but you don't have to create this. So, um, as I said, we're going to be talking about budget today. And if you are following along with us, we're going month by month, step by step, to help you enroll into the program. And if you are following along, last time we did person-centered plan, and before that we talked about our pre-enrollment supports, our independent facilitators, and now you are here. We're here to talk about the budget process. And if you also look, we are just a little bit more than halfway. So you are on your way to getting enrolled, which is super exciting. I know it can seem like a very onerous process, but it actually, as you're just going step by step, you just kind of get there. So I start every meeting talking about why we're here. And it isn't just about the services. We're talking about self-determination as a philosophy, which is really important to me as a parent of a person with a disability, that I want to know that my son has the freedom, authority, responsibility, support, and confirmation of his life. And it seems like these are things that everybody has and can take for granted. But unfortunately, for a lot of people with disabilities, these are things that they have to um, fight to get. And when we talk about self-determination, we talk a lot about these rights for our loved ones and for the participants. So, what are we going to learn today? You're going to learn how a budget is calculated, what's included in budgets, what to do if you disagree with how the budget, what they came up with for the budget, the role of the regional center in this process, and a timeline of what to somewhat expect. Now, there's no hard and fast timeline, but we'll get to that and we'll talk about that in a second. So, let's just start with the very basic. What is the SDP budget? The budget is the total dollar amount that you are going to have to spend in the self-determination program. Now, we are going to take that total dollar amount and go to the spending plan and figure out how that's spent. And next month, we get to talk about the spending plan, which is the fun part. I think that's where your person-centered plan and your self-determination program comes alive. But to get there, we've got to come up with this dollar amount. Now, this dollar amount is based on traditional system service codes. And it gets a little bit confusing. This is one of the, I think, more confusing parts about self-determination program is our budget's based on traditional system. And then when we get to the spending plan, we have all new service codes for self-determination program. But right now, when you're coming up with your budget, we're still thinking traditional services. You still have to follow the purchase of service policies and standards of your regional center. So if you don't know what those are, every single regional center, we have 21 regional centers who, I can't have a training without saying it, 21 regional centers, 21 different ways of doing things. They each have a purchase the service policy. And what that means is each regional center can kind of choose how they're going to provide services. And that means it can vary greatly between regional centers. So just because there's a list of all services that can be provided by a regional center doesn't mean every regional center offers that service. They may have rules around services. So a great one to kind of, that you'll realize how different they are is if you look at social recreation. One regional center could say, we provide one social rec per year, 2 per year. Some will say there's no maximum. You can have as many as is appropriate for you. So they can each have their own policy on this. And that means when you're creating this budget, you still have to follow those rules. Now, let's say your regional center has a policy that says you can have one social rec per year. That's what they will fund for this total dollar amount. It does not mean that when you get to the self-determination program, you can't say, well, you know what? I'm going to meet all my needs and my goals by doing lots of social rec, and that'll be okay. So that's really important. Um, the rates in the traditional system are set by the state, or they're combination. They're set by your regional centers vendor these services, and those are set by the state. We're going to talk a little bit about how you know what the rate should be later on and how they're calculated. And finally, what's going to happen with this SDP budget is the regional center is going to certify if you had stayed in the traditional system, this is the amount of money that they would have spent on you had you stayed there. And that's kind of a key piece. So let's talk a little bit about what this means. And I know there's going to be people who are asking, what if I have no services? What if I, and I promise you, we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about that. So to begin with, where do we start the budget process? Because we got to start somewhere. We're going to start by looking at a previous 12-month expenditure report. And I'm going to show you a sample of one. And this is something that you can request and ask for a copy of to see. Because some of us don't remember what we had authorized or didn't even realize we had things. And so this is an important piece. The regional center then is going to review your person-centered plan that you turned in, if you did one, which we highly recommend you do. And that is going to help inform your IPP, this transition IPP that's going to move you into self-determination program. It's important that you get those goals that were in your person-centered plan onto your IPP, because if you don't have a goal in your IPP for something, you can't put it in your spending plan in the future. So this is one of the things that you're going to be thinking about and talking about in these meetings. You are going to be having a meeting and talking about, in most cases, some of the regional centers will just send you the first budget, but usually you'll sit down, talk about that person-centered plan, talk about maybe in your person-centered plan, you determined that there was a service that you currently require that you do not have, that you're asking for a new service. And so those are things that will be discussed at that meeting. Remember, this is traditional system. This is like any other IPP meeting that you've had. You can always request a new service if it's something you require right now. The regional center is going to create this budget tool for you, and then they're going to certify it. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, I don't even know the traditional services to base these on. So we will put in the chat these slides and a PDF so you can get links on all these slides. And on here, there are links to a list of all the, well, not all, but most of the adult services you could possibly have. State Council made it. It's a great list. And they broke it up by adult services and student services. The other place to look is what they call Title 17. And this is the list of all the services a regional center could offer. Now, be aware, remember we talked about those purchase of service policies. Every regional center may not offer every single one of these services, or there may be requirements before the regional center can pay for one of these services. So if you see something like speech and language in the student services, yes, the regional center can pay as payer of last resort, meaning they can't pay for it if you're still in school until you go to the school district, you get a denial. And for speech, you would also need to go to your insurance and get a denial. So we're in the traditional system building this budget, so all of those rules will apply. So if you want the links to these, get the slides out of the chat and you'll be able to get all of these links. It'll also be on our website. So now, how is the budget calculated? And this is where a lot of people are saying, well, wait a second, either I'm new to the regional center, or a lot of reason people go into the self-determination program is because the services they had weren't working for them, or they haven't been using them. They didn't, there's a reason that you're usually going in to self-determination program. And so don't worry if you don't have a lot of services in your last 12 months. it can be adjusted. Now, there are a few ways that they're going to adjust it or come up with these totals, and think of it like your typical IPP meeting. So if you are new to the regional center, you will have an IPP meeting where you sit down and say, here are my needs. These are the services that we would need. Now, remember, just because you're asking for this traditional service doesn't mean you're going to have to use it exactly the same in self-determination program. So when you're asking for these services, you might, so I'll give you an example of my son. He needed social recreation. He knew he needed it. He had tried every one of the vendors at our regional center and he didn't like any of them. None of them worked. And it eventually just kind of fell off of his IPP. This didn't mean he currently needed this service. And so he was able to ask for the service knowing we could get those needs met in a much better way in self-determination. So we were able to add the social skills training to his IPP. So the reasons that things might change, you could add services, is you're new to the regional center, your needs or something in your life has changed. If we call it the drop off sometimes, if you are graduating from school and you're the largest generic resource, the person who gave you the most services, the school district is now going away. Well, the regional center is going to kind of step up and take up some of those services and help you in your future life. So you may need to rethink your IPP completely at that point. Or maybe you didn't use many services before. We call that sometimes you had a low POS, you had a low service authorizations, and it could be for many, many reasons. Maybe you didn't know what services were available. Nobody ever told you what services were available. Maybe you were like my son, he tried them and they didn't work for him. Maybe you tried them and they couldn't find providers for you. So there could be a lot of reasons why you didn't have a lot of services. And so these will all be addressed in this budget meeting. Your IPP team is going to agree on this amount. So they can't just say, here's your budget, take it or leave it. You guys have to come to an agreement. You will sign it saying, I agree to it. They will sign it saying that this is what they would have spent. So we'll talk a little bit later about what happens if you disagree or there's something in there that you think is missing. So you can request your 12-month spending report. Now, I know this is like an eye chart. It's hard to see. Every regional center has a different spending report. So yours may not look like this, but they should have the basic same information that you're looking at. So I'm just giving you a sample here so we can walk through what a budget would look like. Because I'm one of those visual people. I want to see a budget. So if you look at this person, they didn't spend anything last year. They had authorized services. Those were the top line here. It looks like they had authorized services for respite starting in October, and they had adaptive skills starting in January, and they didn't use any of them for whatever reason. So we're looking at this. Now, one of the biggest things that just recently changed, and it'll take a little bit of time to be implemented across all of the regional centers, is that they used to calculate budgets based on what was utilized, not authorized. And that meant you had to have used the services. And that's where they started. They changed that rule to now it's what services did you have authorized? And so that's kind of a big shift if you've been in the world for a while. So things may change. Now, this is for the initial budget. Remember, we're talking about enrolling in the initial budget. We really don't know yet how that authorized piece is going to play out for renewals. So here's some important things I want you to know as a participant, as a self-advocate about the budget. That every person's budget, it's going to be based on your unique needs. And what I hear a lot, and it's a totally valid question, people don't know, like, how much should I get? And they want to compare budgets. And I really encourage you not to compare budgets with other people because you really do not know their needs. And two people who you think look like they have very similar needs could have very different needs. So I encourage you not to compare your budget to other people, but what you want to do and why we always talk about how important a person-centered plan is do I have enough in this budget to meet my goals in my person-centered plan, the things that I want to accomplish? Do we have enough money here to accomplish those things? So a correct budget for a person is based on their unique needs. So and the goal here is not to get the highest budget. We want self-determination program to exist forever. I want my son to grow old in this program. We, as participants, when we talked about the initial principles, we have a responsibility as well. We have to be good stewards of this money in order for this program to continue and to succeed. So that means you should not be going in and trying to just get the highest budget possible, just asking for services just to get the total amount. Again, we want to make sure that your loved one or your needs are being met. This isn't a challenge or a race to get the highest budget possible. Um, and in developing these budgets, we talked a little bit about this already. The purchases service policies apply and generic resource. You have to go and use the school district, insurance, those types of Department of Rehabilitation first before you can access them for this budget. Now, there are IFs and people in this room who are going to laugh about this slide. I want you to know that there are no set timelines. And when people are transitioning in, I want you to know it's an exercise in patience. It's gonna take some time, especially if you're a person who didn't have a lot of services before. You didn't have those authorized services. If you walked into self-determination and you had adequate authorized services, you could potentially transition pretty quickly because you're not asking for anything new. But as we know with the regional center, in the traditional system, anytime you ask for something new, it's a process. It takes time. So there is one timeline we can try to utilize, and it's a traditional system timeline that exists. And remember, we're still in the traditional system. We haven't switched over to SDP yet. So this is a timeline they really should meet, which is when you request an IPP meeting in writing, they have 30 days to hold that meeting. And if you do not come to an agreement in those 30 days, they are supposed to reset a meeting in the next 15 days, and the next 15 days, and the next 15 days until you reach that agreement. And so you can try to use those timelines to see if you can move the process along. So what I will frequently do when I turn in a person-centered plan, I will at that point ask in writing for an IPP budget meeting. And then they really do have that 30-day countdown. Now, we also have to understand that we have, I think, we're about 750,000 people in the regional center system, and we have, I think we're about over 7,100 in the self-determination program. That means the chance that your service coordinator has ever had a self-determination program case is probably very low. So you guys may be working on this and figuring it out together, and that's okay. We want to be partners in this. You know, don't be upset with them if they say, I've got to figure this out. I haven't done this before. You know, let's work this together and get this done together. So be patient with your service coordinators, with the process. Expect it's going to take some time, but also stay on top of it. Because if you just wait for them to do it and you don't keep doing reminders, you're going to get shuffled off to the side. So what I do is every Monday morning, I look at all my cases and I say, okay, here's a follow-up on every single case. Where are we at? Just checking in, want to see, very politely, keeping on top of the case. If you need those assessments, so if you request a service that requires an assessment, it is going to make your enrollment process take longer, and it's going to make this budget process take longer because they can't just add a service without an assessment if that's what's required in the traditional system. And this is kind of an odd thing because you may be getting an assessment for a service you know you're going to use differently in self-determination program, but that's okay. Know that as long as it's going to meet that goal in an IPP, get that assessment. And now, let's say you have quite a bit of money in your authorized services, but you had this one service you were asking for the assessment, you could go ahead and transition into the self-determination program pending that assessment and then update your budget once you're in. I wouldn't let just one service necessarily hold up your entire transition. So keep that in mind. You can just ask that they pay for the assessment outside or include the assessment in your budget and you'll put it in your spending plan as a one time and you'll go and get it. So that was the last one. You can use these funds while you're waiting. You can go ahead and move. Okay. I'm going to take a little sip of coffee. I'm going to look at the questions real quick. Um, and then we're going to look at a sample budget. Mm, this is a great question. What is the best advice for an IPP? Does the parent make the goals or collaborate with the service coordinator? This is going to be a collaboration. You can make recommendations and you can say, here's a need. What I often will recommend, because what I'll see is parents will talk to other parents or they'll go on Facebook and say, oh, we get personal assistant. And if you go into an IPP and request personal assistant, at a regional center that doesn't offer personal assistance, because remember, they have those purchase of service standards, policies, they may not offer. They may just say, oh, no, we don't offer that and move on. So I think as a parent or as a self-advocate, it's really important to describe in that IPP meeting the support you need. Say, I need somebody to help me with getting my laundry picked up and getting some food in the house and doing these different things. What service do you recommend we have? What do you think that we should do? And so collaborate with your service coordinator. Look at the services that are available at your regional center and you can find those purchase of service policies on every regional center is required to post them on their website. Gotta tell you, sometimes they're kind of hard to find. You gotta really dig and search, but they should be on their website. So you should be able to see what your regional center offers. So, great question. So let's look at a sample budget. So the Department of Developmental Services has a sample budget tool that they have posted. I have a link so you can go and download it if you want to play with it. If you're one of those people who likes to play with it, you can. Every regional center does not use this exact tool, but they use something somewhat similar. They seem to be, all of them are calculating about the same way. So we're just going to look at this tool so you will know what each of the sections means. So let me go back and show you. So this isn't the whole tool. There are 5 pages to it. These are just the first 2. So what you'll see is there's a section 1, section 2, section 3. We're going to go through each of those right now and talk about what each of them mean. And I'm putting our 12-month history behind it so you can kind of see where this information might be coming from. So when you start, they may say you are starting with a baseline. That baseline used to be what was utilized. It will now be what was authorized. What we will see is some regional centers will put 0 here because somebody may not have used it the whole year. And we're going to talk about that in the next section that can be very confusing. So don't panic if you see this first one, which is the $0 or a very low dollar amount. Don't panic. That is just the starting point. That's the beginning of the tool. Let's go to our second step. They love to use complicated terms. And in this, they use the term annualization. I'm going to explain to you what annualization is in a very much more easy to understand way. If you look at our sample person here, they got in-home respite services. They didn't get it until October. So they only had the service for 2 months that were authorized in the last year. However, the intent is they are going to be continuing it and they were going to have it for 12 months. So we need to make sure that there is 12 months of this 50720 because that's what they would be authorized for. When you're talking annualization, what they mean is making sure that whatever was authorized is authorized for the full 12 months. Now, here's another good one to look at. There was a change in rate along the way on this one. This was adaptive skills. And so it started out authorized at 1,471, and then it went to 1,770.25. You'll also notice they were missing December. So their authorized services should be based on 12 months of the 1770.25. So if you look at the total authorized here, it was 18,575. And if you look at the total authorized for adaptive skills here, it's 21,243. So that's what this table is going to do. It's going to make sure that you have the correct amount for the entire 12 months. So that's what this annualized table is going to do. It's going to make sure that you have the services for the entire 12 months. Now, maybe you have a service that doesn't go 12 months. Maybe you have a camping service that is only for 1 or 2 months. That's okay. That you would just keep that in there, that you don't need to. Everything is not necessarily going to be spread out over the full 12 months, but this is the opportunity to get that put in there. So that is your second section of the budget. Okay. The third section of the budget tool, I honestly have never used. They call this a group contract table. And the way it's described is often that if, let's say, you had an adult day program and they had a bus that went around and picked up a few different people, the rate of that would then be divided by how many people they're picking up. So in other words, you wouldn't get, let's just round numbers, say they get $100 for that hour to pick up 5 people. You wouldn't get the full $100. It would be the $100 divided by those 5 people. So that's where that would be added into your budget tool. It would, if you have any of those services that are divided up, I honestly haven't really had a lot of experience of anybody using this part of the tool. This is the one where most of us live. Section 4 is any newly identified services. Now, we talked about social training, so I use this as an example for my son. Do not quote the dollar amounts in here. This is just an example, and we're going to talk about where you get the rates and all that in a moment. But this is where if you had a new service that you were adding would be added to the budget here. So in other words, it's not going to show up in your authorized services because you're asking for it new. And so this is how we would get a new service added in. So if you were somebody coming in with brand new to the regional center, you didn't have any, this is where all of your services would land because you don't have any to annualize. If you had very low purchase of service authorizations, this is where everything would show up here. This one is non-continuing services. Now, this isn't something that so if you're in self-determination program and you had something on your spending plan, that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about for the budget. Did they increase your budget for something for a one-time thing? And so let's say you were going to have a ramp put up to your house, and they said, we are going to increase your budget $1,000 to have this ramp put in your house. But it's not going to be in your budget next year. This really is this number 6 is for people who are in the renewal budget year mostly, or if you had something already authorized, let's say last year on your authorizations, you had that ramp put in there. Well, they're not going to fund it again for this year. So if there was anything that was added in, that was a one-time that's not going to be. Now, this is where I see the most mistakes happen on the budget tool. Number 6, where I will see a regional center remove something here that was never added in the first place. So what I'm always doing on number 6 is I'm looking at those authorized to make sure that if they say we're removing $1,000 because you had this ramp, I need to see that it was authorized and utilized in your previous year. Otherwise, they're just removing $1,000 from your program. So it needs to line up with something that a positive and a negative, they're just zeroing it out of your budget. Okay. And number 7, services handled outside of the individual budget. There are some services that will not be included in this budget because for a couple reasons. One is that self-determination program by the statute requires everything has to be federally reimbursable. But the state of California will pick up the tab for certain programs. And so when you're in the traditional system, you may have some things that are 100% paid for by the state that wouldn't be able to be paid for in self-determination program. A couple of these services might be competitive integrated employment incentives, the paid internship program, the coordinated family support program was considered a pilot program and it's right now being funded by the state, so it can't be in there. If you have any help with co-payments or deductibles on your insurance, those things would be held outside and be paid through outside of your budget and outside of your spending plan. So there's just a few things. If you have an exception where they are helping with housing, rental payments, or anything like that, those would be held outside. So there are a few things that may not be included in this budget that you can spend on your spending plan, and this is where those things would go. We're almost done here. Believe it or not, yay. The tool will actually calculate this for you. They did it in Word. I don't know why. I'm an Excel person, but um, not to be mean or rude, mistakes happen with numbers. So I will always double check. I will always go back and look at all those sections and make sure that they were calculated correctly. This is where you would get that subtotal and here is your total. So 6 and 7 are being removed, those non-continuing services, the services that aren't going to be part of your budget. Again, those would have to have been authorized in order to be removed here. And here is your budget. This is the one that they're going to propose to you. Now, here's the hardest part, and I'm going to answer there was a great question in the chat that I want to answer first, and then we'll talk about how we figure out what the rates are supposed to be. Is there any service that can't be in the budget? And is there a list of those specific services? So things that can be in the budget are all the same services that you could get in the traditional system. And so things that can't be in the budget are the things that are not offered through your regional center or a generic resource is available first. So this is the same as any other IPP you've had in the past, whether a service can be provided or not. Those are the services. So you have to have services that are provided through your regional center through those purchase of service policies. And there isn't a specific list, unfortunately, of what's not available, but I did have those links of what is available in the budget. So remember, one of the mistakes I see happen is people get really excited about self-determination program. They're looking at the list of services available in self-determination program, the service codes there. If you have a service code that is in 300 anything, those are self-determination program service codes. Those are not able to be added to your budget because those services are not available in the traditional system necessarily. So do not go into your budget asking for services that are spending plans, self-determination code services. Remember, the budget is based on traditional services, and it's one of the hardest concepts, most confusing concepts to understand. So when you are talking about your budget, you are only talking about traditional services. So now here we come to the rates. How do you know what they're giving you as the correct rate when they're calculating the budget? there was a rate study that came out, and in that study, the intent was to make the rates across the state more consistent. And they did not do every single service code, but they did a chunk of them. And they came out with a what the rate should be in those specific service codes at every regional center. If you go to this link, you will see those, and that will give you an idea of what they should be. Now, if you look at this, and we're going to go to the next page and look at what this sample looks like. Look at the rate only. So if you go to this link and it gives you two options for every single regional center, go to the one that says rates only, which is a Excel sheet, because that one actually includes the service codes, not just the description. So for lay people, I'm not going to remember what the service codes are or what the definitions are, so that one helps a little bit. It looks like this. And so you will see, here's personal assistant, here's the service code. Now look at these numbers. These do not say 300. These are traditional system service codes. Now, we are not, there has been no decision by the Department of Developmental Services whether the self-determination program participants get the full rate, this first column. And as I said, 21 regional centers are interpreting it 21 different ways. And until we have a final decision or some sort of directive, it's going to be a difficult battle of what rate they would get. So here are the two options. You could be getting what they call, and you'll hear us say, the 90%. What that means is every vendor under 062 can get this 90% base rate, the 3272. If they do a quality incentive program, if they do, and in this case, currently, the current incentive for them was to sign up for a statewide providers list. If they did that, they would get an additional 363 per hour. So they would get this full rate of 36.35. Now, the problem is we sometimes are not using a vendored provider on this spending plan side. We're using somebody else. And so they're saying, well, everybody should just get the base rate then. If you happen to be using a vendor provider and they are going to bill you on your spending plan at the full rate, you can always ask for them to include the full rate in your budget and explain why. Otherwise, you're not going to have enough money to pay for it. So this is if you are going to use that traditional vendor and they have the full rate, you're going to want to ask for that full rate. What I'm seeing kind of across the board is all over the place. Some regional centers will give you the full rate. Some will give you the base rate. Some will update the rates automatically when you do your annual renewal or when you're starting your budget now. Some of them won't give them to you at all. You have to ask for them. So it's all over the road, but at least you're going to, based on this, have a ballpark of where these rates should be so you'll know if something is really far off. The other place you're going to find those rates is that 12-month. Look at your authorizations and find out what they were paying. Now, in that, you might have somebody who, because it's a provider that had been around a really long time, that they may have a rate higher than this full rate. Currently, vendors were not required to drop their rates to match this. They had a grace period. Well, with the new budget cuts coming, the California budget cuts, we're not even talking about the federal yet, one of the things they removed was that grace period. We don't know when it's going to take effect, but at some point, those vendors, those traditional system vendors, may be required to match these rates. In the meantime, if they have a higher rate and you are using that vendor, you might want to ask your regional center, hey, can I get the higher rate because I am actually using this service? Okay, here are just some important points about budgets. We talked about this a little bit already. They're based on individual needs. This is why when we talked about the person-centered plan, why the person-centered plan was so important, because that person-centered plan is hopefully going to tease out any needs. The reason we talked about your planner being an expert in both traditional system and self-determination is they should be able, as they're doing the person-centered plan, be able to identify, well, Had you stayed in the traditional system, I think that this service would have been the appropriate one for you to meet your needs. And so this is why those person-centered plans, especially for people who have no services or brand new services, are really, really going to be helpful in that area. We talked about not comparing your budgets to others. We talked about the traditional system rules apply. That means those purchase of service policies apply, the requirement for assessments, payer of last resort, meaning the regional center, any other service needs to be utilized first, which is a generic resource or um, uh, insurance. The other thing you will hear is natural resources. And for minors a lot, you will hear it's a parental responsibility. So there are things that cannot go into a minor's budget, and these are the rules around regional center services in general, right? That as a parent, you have specific things that you should be covering, whether your kid had a disability or not, that you would be responsible for those. Um, and I have to say, part of the reason that the budget is my least favorite part is these rate discussions can be challenging. We have to know that our service coordinators, for so many years, they never talked dollars. They always talked how many hours are you going to do. So these can be very uncomfortable conversations for your service coordinator, for you. And so, be patient with everybody around, and understand that, this is not an easy part of the process. Now, what if you disagree with the budget? Um, you're in the traditional system. You have all of the exact rights you would have if you were not transitioning to self-determination program and you asked for a service. So if you ask for the service and they just, let's say you called your service coordinator and they said no over the phone, said, well, I need an IPP meeting to review this and to talk about this. Requested in writing. Um, Put a formal request in for this service. If they say, no, you can't have it, they cannot just give you a verbal, no, you can't have this service. They have to give you what they call a notice of action to say why they are denying that service. So let's say you asked for social rec and they said, no, we're not going to provide that. You ask for a notice of action. They have to give you a notice of action if they're changing services as well. So let's say you look at your authorized and say, we're not going to be offering this to you any longer. It's like they have to give you a 30-day notice before they can drop any service that give you the opportunity to appeal it. So part of that notice of action will give you the information of how you appeal, how you challenge that you disagree with what the reasons they're giving that you don't get that service. So you have all of the same rights. You've got the fair hearing, which is the appeal process, which you can, when you ask for a fair hearing, you can ask for an informal meeting, a mediation, and then the fair hearing. You could also file a 4731 complaint against them. That's often used if you have something in your IPP that they are not giving the service to you. That's when you would use a 4731 complaint. If you requested an IPP meeting and you're 60, 90 days out and they didn't give you one, you could file a 4731 complaint. 4731s are when your civil rights are being violated. That's what those complaints are for. And you will always be a part of the regional center system. Self-determination program is an alternative way to receive services, but you are still a regional center client, so you will always have these same rights, whether you are in the self-determination program or not. That was a lot. I know it was a lot. Please, if you need to review any of this or you have questions about any of them, come to Complete Guide to SDP.org. That is our site. We have web pages that go through every step by step. You will be able to find this video there. You can get the PDF of all the slides with all the links there. And so it's a great resource. And our next training next month on the first Tuesday is going to be on spending plans. Yay, my fun part. That's where we're going to get to, right?